What happens when a Hollywood star known for his cool composure meets a talk show host who refuses to hold back? When charm and control are tested live, under the blinding lights of morning television, the studio can turn from laughter to silence in an instant. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to Stage View right now, hit that like button, and drop a comment below if you think even the calmest celebrities have their breaking point. Because what you're about to witness isn't just an interview. It's a collision of pride, pressure, and the power of live TV. The cameras were rolling. The theme music of The View faded, and applause filled the air. It was supposed to be another easy segment, Jake Gyllenhaal promoting his latest film, a story about redemption, inner demons, and fractured identities. The audience was cheerful. Jake, in his signature dark suit and an almost effortless smile, sat poised between Whoopi Goldberg and Sunny Hostin. But something felt different. Maybe it was the tension of the morning. Maybe it was the way Sunny's questions had been worded during rehearsal. Or maybe, just maybe, Jake wasn't in the mood to play the Hollywood game. Whoopi, always the seasoned host, kicked things off smoothly. "So, Jake," she said, leaning forward, voice warm and familiar, "you've got this new movie that's got everyone talking. You go deep into character again. And you've said before it takes a toll on you emotionally. How do you even prepare for something that dark?" Jake smiled, eyes flickering toward the camera. Whoopi, I think I kind of live there sometimes," he said softly, chuckling, but his tone carried weight. "You have to let the darkness in, but also know when to let it out." Applause. A few gasps. The mood thoughtful, cinematic. Then Sunny leaned forward. Her notes were on the table, neatly stacked, but she wasn't looking at them. Her eyes locked onto Jake with a precision that could cut through the studio lights. "Jake," she said, her voice calm, careful, the kind of calm that hides something deeper. "You've talked about letting the darkness in, but some of your co-stars have said that working with you can be intense, even intimidating. Is that part of the method, or something else?" The audience stirred. Whoopi glanced sideways. Even Joy Behar tilted her head. Jake blinked, once, twice, then gave a small laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well," he said, leaning back, "I think intensity is part of the job. You can't make something real without going there." Sunny didn't break. "Right," she said. "But when you go there, is there ever a line, between being committed to your craft and being difficult to work with?" The laughter that followed was uneasy. A few claps, some murmurs. The studio lights felt hotter. Jake's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "I think that depends on perspective," he said slowly. "If someone doesn't understand what it takes to make something true, maybe they'd call it difficult." Now there was silence. Whoopi opened her mouth, maybe to pivot the conversation, but Sunny wasn't done. "Perspective," she repeated. "Interesting choice of word. Because I think a lot of people watching might say the same thing about you, Jake. That sometimes your perspective overshadows others." Jake leaned forward. "Are you saying I overshadow people, Sunny?" Sunny didn't flinch. "I'm asking if you're aware of it." The tension snapped like a string. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jake laughed, quietly, sharply, and glanced at the audience as if looking for an ally. "Wow," he said. "That's a hell of a question for 10 a.m. Whoopi shifted in her seat. "Sunny," she began, trying to steer it back. But the energy had already shifted. The air between them crackled with something raw, electric. Sunny's tone softened, but her words didn't. "I think the audience deserves honesty," she said. "Because people admire you, they really do. But when an actor talks about letting darkness in, sometimes the people around you get caught in that storm too. Don't you think?" Jake's eyes darkened. For a moment, it wasn't the movie star sitting there. It was the man beneath, defensive, exhausted, human. "I think," he said, his voice lower now, "that people love to tell stories about artists when they don't understand what it costs to be one." The studio went silent. Not the silence of boredom, the silence of awe, of disbelief. Even the camera crew hesitated, unsure whether to zoom in or cut to commercial. Jake leaned back again, the faintest trace of a smirk pulling at his lips. "But hey," he said, turning toward the audience, "I get it. Controversy makes good TV, right?" A nervous chuckle spread through the audience. Whoopi forced a light laugh. "We do like good TV, Jake," she said, half joking. "But we also like peace." Sunny smiled politely, but her eyes stayed on him, unblinking, probing. "And peace," she said softly, "takes honesty too." The crowd murmured again. Jake's jaw tightened. Something was happening beneath the surface. Something neither of them could pull back now. The camera light glowed red. The show was live. The world was watching. Whoopi finally broke the tension. "We're going to take a quick break," she said, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. "Don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back with Jake Gyllenhaal." Applause thundered, too loud, too forced. The band played the outro tune. But behind the smiles, behind the glossy showbiz surface, Jake's hands were clenched under the table. Sunny exhaled slowly, steadying herself. When the cameras cut to commercial, the sound engineer whispered into his headset. The studio just froze. And it had, because what began as a polite conversation had just cracked open something darker. An ego, an accusation, a challenge neither side was ready to lose. The next part would not be about questions and answers anymore. It would be about control, and who would take it back when the cameras came on again. The commercial break felt longer than it was. Every second stretched, thick with anticipation. Backstage, the crew whispered, casting furtive glances at the monitors. Even the baristas in the studio cafe paused mid-pour, as if sensing the storm about to hit. Jake Gyllenhaal sat in his chair, still impeccably composed, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. His fingers drummed lightly on the armrest. Sunny Hostin, notes forgotten on the table, leaned slightly forward, eyes fixed, calm yet unyielding, a predator sizing up a target. The cameras flicked back to life. The band's theme music faded into the background. The audience clapped politely, but the energy had shifted. You could almost taste the electricity in the air. "Welcome back," Whoopi began, her voice brighter than her mood, attempting to anchor the ship in stormy waters. "Jake Gyllenhaal is here with us. And Sunny Hostin has some interesting questions for you." Sunny didn't flinch. She smiled, tight, polite, and leaned into the microphone. "Jake, before the break, we touched on intensity. Let's go deeper. You've been described as one of the most dedicated actors of your generation. But dedication can look different depending on who you're talking to. Some people say your focus can be overwhelming, even intimidating. How do you respond to that?" A murmur ran through the audience, barely audible, but enough to make the tension tangible. Jake's gaze flicked toward her, assessing. His lips pressed into a thin line. The famous charm of Hollywood, the effortless smile that lit up red carpets, seemed contained, fragile even. "Intimidating?" he repeated slowly, letting the word linger. "I think that's perception." "Perception is important," Sunny countered softly, almost conversationally, but with a sharp edge. "But perception is also reality. And if multiple people feel the same way, doesn't that say something?" The audience shifted in their seats. You could almost hear the unspoken gasp. Whoopi cleared her throat. "Sunny, maybe let's—" "No, Whoopi," Sunny interrupted gently but firmly. "I want to understand. The public doesn't see rehearsals or long nights on set. They see results. And Jake, the results are phenomenal. But at what cost?" Jake leaned forward now. His dark eyes locked on hers. "At what cost, Sunny?" His voice was quieter, almost intimate, but edged with steel. "Are you suggesting that the work we do, the art we create, is measured only by comfort?" Sunny didn't blink. "No," she said calmly. "But comfort isn't the point. Respect is. Accountability is. Talent doesn't give someone a free pass to hurt or overshadow others. Don't you agree?" A ripple ran through the studio. The audience, now fully engaged, leaned forward in their seats. The band's off-camera rhythm section played a soft, tense beat. Jake exhaled sharply, the kind of breath you take when you're deciding between confrontation and control. He smiled, a small, calculated smile, the kind that could charm or cut. "I respect people," he said slowly, "but I also respect the work. And sometimes the work demands more than comfort, more than convenience. That's the price of authenticity, the price of truth." Sunny tilted her head, lips pressed together, her voice steady but imbued with subtle challenge. "Truth is subjective, isn't it? And sometimes people confuse intensity for truth. Sometimes they confuse ego for authenticity. How do you make sure the two aren't the same?" Jake's smile flickered, gone in an instant. His jaw clenched, and he leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping rhythmically. The audience held its collective breath. The studio lights glared down, unforgiving. "Sunny," he said finally, his voice calm but heavy measured, the kind of voice that can quiet a room without raising it. "You seem very interested in my methods. But tell me, are we talking about me, or are we talking about fear?" Sunny's eyes narrowed fractionally, but her poise never wavered. "Fear," she echoed. "Fear can't explain everything, Jake. People deserve clarity. People deserve honesty. And I think part of your fame is that people wonder what it's like behind the scenes. They want to know if brilliance comes at the expense of those around you. Jake's gaze swept over the audience. He could see the phones raised, the anticipation, the invisible line being crossed that separated polite conversation from confrontation. Then he looked back at Sunny. "You want honesty?" he said, leaning in closer, voice dropping to a near whisper, almost conspiratorial. "Honesty is brutal. Honesty isn't easy. You think the world is ready for that? For someone to tell them exactly how it feels to be inside these roles, inside this life? To tell them what it costs to be me?" The studio air seemed to thicken. Murmurs ran through the crowd, subtle but palpable. Even Whoopi, usually untouchable in her calm, leaned forward slightly, the tip of her finger tapping her chin as she watched the verbal chess match unfold. Sunny didn't back down. Her voice remained soft, yet unshakable. "I think the world can handle truth," she said. "But it can't handle arrogance disguised as devotion. It can't handle brilliance without accountability. And that, Jake, that's what people want from you. That's what I'm asking for." Jake's eyes narrowed. There was a long pause, the kind that makes seconds feel like hours. His hands unclenched, then clenched again. The room seemed to contract around him and Sunny, the space between them charged with unspoken electricity. Finally, he spoke, voice low, almost a growl. "You know, Sunny, I've been called many things. Intense, difficult, passionate, but never understood." The audience shifted again. Cameras caught every subtle twitch, every micro-expression. The tension was cinematic, almost unbearable. You could feel the walls of the studio vibrating with anticipation. Sunny leaned in slightly, almost conspiratorially herself, her tone unwavering. "Maybe that's because you've never let anyone in," she said. "Maybe that's why people misunderstand. But the truth is still waiting for you to own it." Jake's lips parted as if to respond, then paused. He exhaled. The silence became deafening. The studio felt suspended in time. Everyone knew the calm before the storm was over. The real reckoning was about to begin. And when the cameras returned after the next commercial, no one would walk away the same. The cameras came back from commercial, and the studio lights blazed hotter, sharper, almost accusingly. Every face in the audience seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm that had been simmering since the first exchange. The applause was polite, hesitant, the kind that pretends to celebrate but senses the chaos lurking underneath. Jake Gyllenhaal adjusted his suit jacket, fingers brushing the fabric as if anchoring himself. His gaze flicked to Sunny Hostin, who sat unmoved, her posture straight, eyes unwavering. There was no malice in her stance, only unrelenting scrutiny, the kind that could peel away layers of armor with a single, well-timed word. "Jake," Sunny began, her voice calm but firm, "let's not dance around it. You've been called intense. You've been called difficult. But some people say you've allowed that intensity to hurt others. Co-stars, crew members, even friends. Can you honestly tell us where the line is? Or do you believe there isn't one?" Jake's jaw tightened. The subtle smile that had masked his nerves vanished entirely. His hands, previously relaxed on the armrest, gripped the edge of the chair. The tension was so palpable, you could almost hear the air straining. "Sunny," he said, his voice low, deliberate, almost a warning. "Intensity isn't a crime. Dedication isn't something you can measure with a ruler. If someone can't keep up, that's not my problem. That's theirs." A ripple of murmurs ran through the audience. Some leaned forward, captivated. Others sat frozen, unsure whether to cheer or gasp. The cameras lingered on his face, catching the subtle twitch in his left eye, the barely perceptible signal of someone holding back a storm. Sunny's eyes narrowed fractionally. Her lips pressed together, and then she spoke, each word carefully measured, deliberate. "Dedication isn't a free pass, Jake. You can't confuse commitment with cruelty. And people feel it when you cross that line, even if you don't see it yourself." Jake's eyes flicked to the audience, then back to her. The studio felt smaller, the lights brighter, the space between them charged with an electric intensity. "You think I don't see it?" he said, voice sharper now, almost cutting through the air. "You think I'm blind to how people respond to me? Sunny, I see everything. Every reaction, every whisper, every judgment. And I choose how to respond. That's the line." Sunny didn't flinch. "And when the line hurts people, when the intensity becomes intimidation, that's not choice anymore, Jake. That's consequence. Don't you think you owe the people you work with some kind of accountability?" The audience was leaning in now, collective breaths caught, as if the very walls of the studio were holding their tension. Jake's eyes darkened, a flicker of anger igniting beneath his calm exterior. Accountability, he repeated, his tone low, deliberate. Is that what you want from me? A confession? A mea culpa for doing the work I've been entrusted to do? That's rich, coming from a television set where everyone wears a mask for applause. Sunny's calmness didn't waver. If anything, her voice softened, drawing the audience in like a magnet. This isn't about masks, Jake. This is about truth. You can be brilliant, intense, unstoppable, and still be human. You can still choose to honor the people who make that brilliance possible. That's what I'm asking for. The words hung in the air. The studio lights seemed to pulse with the tension. The audience was frozen, captivated, the kind of silence that could shatter at any moment. Jake's expression shifted. For the first time, the layers of control seemed to crack. A flicker of frustration passed across his face, quickly masked by a tight-lipped smile. You know, he said, leaning back slightly, you ask a lot of questions for someone who's not in my shoes. You think it's easy to live in this? To take every criticism, every observation, and still perform at the level people expect. Sunny leaned forward, almost conspiratorial, and her tone was calm but insistent. Maybe it's not easy, but easy isn't the point. Responsibility is. Compassion is. And if you can't see that, maybe that's why people feel intimidated. Maybe that's why people feel afraid to speak their truth around you. Jake's fingers dug into the armrest, knuckles whitening. His voice dropped an octave, the calmness replaced by a simmering intensity. You think people are afraid of me? He asked, eyes flashing. Sunny, fear is nothing compared to the drive to be real. To be truthful in a world that constantly demands false smiles. The audience shivered collectively. Cameras zoomed in, catching every micro-expression. The subtle tightening of Jake's jaw, the almost imperceptible shift in Sunny's posture, the tension in Whoopi's hands as she clasped them tightly. The studio air was thick, almost suffocating. Sunny's response was steady, her tone unwavering. Then maybe it's time for that truth to include everyone, Jake. Not just the character you play, not just the roles you inhabit, but the real people around you. They're part of the story, too. Jake's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, intensity radiating from every pore. The audience could feel it, almost physically. You want honesty? He said, voice low, deliberate, almost dangerous. I'll give you honesty. But honesty isn't comforting. Honesty isn't polite. Honesty doesn't always come with applause. Sunny's eyes held his, unwavering. I don't want comfort. I want accountability. I want truth. And maybe, just maybe, that's the same thing as courage. The studio went silent. Not the polite kind of silence, but the tense, cinematic silence that precedes a shattering revelation. Cameras lingered. The audience held their collective breath. For a moment, the entire world seemed to shrink to the two of them, locked in a battle of words, wills, and truths. Then, almost imperceptibly, Jake exhaled. His posture shifted, shoulders relaxing slightly, though the storm in his eyes remained. He leaned back, staring at Sunny, and for the first time a flicker of respect, grudging wary, appeared in his gaze. You're relentless, he said finally, voice low but steady. I'll give you that. Sunny's lips curved in a faint, victorious smile. Relentless only works if you're asking the right questions. The audience erupted, not applause, but a mixture of shock, admiration, and awe. Cameras zoomed in on Jake's subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement that the game had changed. The tension had reached a breaking point, and yet, somehow, the confrontation had transformed into something else. A reckoning, a moment of clarity neither of them could have scripted. And just as the applause began to settle, Whoopi leaned forward, voice carefully measured. Well, that's television, folks. Raw, real, and unpredictable. Jake Gyllenhaal, ladies and gentlemen. But beneath the smiles and the clapping, the studio still vibrated with the unspoken understanding. Nothing would ever be the same after this. The cameras cut to the wide shot as the studio lights softened slightly, but the air remained thick with tension. Jake Gyllenhaal sat with a quiet intensity, still processing the volley of questions, the scrutiny, and the challenge Sunny had thrown at him. The audience was silent, collectively leaning forward, some wide-eyed, some frozen, unsure whether to clap or simply watch the storm pass. Sunny Hostin sat composed, her posture straight, her eyes unwavering. She had delivered her words like a scalpel, precise, deliberate, impossible to ignore. The power dynamic had shifted. What had started as a standard promotional segment had transformed into a psychological duel, each moment sharpening the tension until it was almost unbearable. Jake finally exhaled slowly, deliberately. His hand brushed the table as if anchoring himself to reality. You know, he began, voice calm but weighted, This isn't easy. Not for me, not for anyone watching. But honesty is always messy. It's never comfortable. And maybe that's the point. Sunny nodded slightly, the faintest smile breaking the edge of the confrontation. Truth never is, she said. And it's brave to face it, especially in a room full of cameras, bright lights, and millions of eyes watching. The audience, sensing the shift from tension to resolution, began to clap tentatively. Then, as Jake looked out at the crowd and allowed a rare, genuine smile, the clapping grew, building into a standing ovation. Not for spectacle, not for theatrics, but for the raw humanity they had witnessed, the vulnerability behind the fame and the Hollywood polish. Whoopi leaned in, voice careful yet celebratory. Well, Jake, that was something else. Not every day do we get to see someone at the top of their craft face such intensity head-on. Jake chuckled lightly, the first real laugh since the segment began. It's all part of the job, Whoopi. And maybe part of life. Confrontation, honesty. It's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Sunny nodded, satisfied but never smug. And maybe that's the lesson for everyone watching. Brilliance and accountability don't have to be separate. They can coexist. But only if we're willing to face the hard questions. The camera cut to the audience, capturing their reactions. Astonishment, relief, admiration, and awe. Some were filming on their phones, others whispering to neighbors. The energy in the room was electric, almost tangible, as if everyone had just witnessed history. Not scandal, but revelation. Outside the studio, the segment exploded across social media. Clips went viral within minutes. Jake's intensity, Sunny's calm confrontation, the moments where tension held the room hostage. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok lit up with reactions, debates, and awestruck commentary. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Jake vs. Sunny. Hashtag StageView exclusive. Hashtag honesty on TV. Memes appeared almost instantly, highlighting the tension, the pauses, the subtle gestures, the micro-expressions. Analysts dissected every word, every glance, every nuance. Fans were divided. Some praised Sunny's courage and Jake's honesty. Others debated the ethics of holding celebrities accountable on live TV. Every clip sparked conversation, from the casual viewer to the most dedicated cinephile. Podcasts picked it up. Late-night shows referenced it. The moment had become more than an interview. It had become a cultural flashpoint. Back in the studio, Jake and Sunny shook hands, a gesture simple but profound. In that handshake, years of Hollywood mystique met journalistic integrity. Mutual respect, hard-earned, was finally acknowledged. Cameras captured it all, and the audience knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. As the show wrapped, the final moments lingered with viewers. The understanding that intensity, accountability, truth, and vulnerability could coexist. The aftermath would continue online, in headlines, and in conversations around the world, but the studio itself had seen the story's climax. Confrontation transformed into clarity. And now, viewers, it's your turn. What do you think of the exchange between Jake Gyllenhaal and Sunny Hostin? Was it a battle, a breakthrough, or both? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Stage View for more explosive, dramatic stories that take you behind the curtain of the world's most captivating moments. Because the truth, raw, unfiltered, and cinematic,